High in the fog-thick hills of a forgotten countryside stood an ancient abbey made of stone, the color of ash and old parchment. It leaned into the landscape like a tired pilgrim, weathered but unyielding, held together by prayers and time. Each winter, just before the year's end, a group of cloaked monks would emerge from its cold halls and make their way through snow-laden corridors. Their boots pressed soft impressions into the drifts, and their breath curled like incense into the silver air. They moved without speaking, for it was the eve of tolling, the one night each year when the great bell of St. Idris would be rung, not for ceremony, not for feast, but for dreams. And bronze darkwood slip through snowbanks, whisper beneath cottage doors, and weave itself into the dreams of every. You see, the people of the surrounding hamlets believed that when the bell rang, its sound low deep. It was said to keep the plague at bay, to summon angels to one's bedside, to guide the lost through storms, and to open the skies to messages otherwise unseen. No one alive knew exactly when this belief had begun. The bell was older than every monk who lived in the abbey, older than the fir trees that circled its chapel yard. Its casting date was lost, rubbed away by centuries of snowfall and candle soot. But still, it rang. And the valley listened. The monks prepared the bell all through the day before. They moved slowly, reverently. Everything was done by hand, as it had always been done. No steel, no clock. They creaked beneath him like the spine of some old mountain creature, half sleeping, and that perhaps the bell had echoed into his mother's dreams before he first drew breath. Only the rhythm of breath and the feel of the rope worn smooth by hundreds of winters. Brother Elion, the youngest among them, was chosen to climb the bell tower that year. He had quiet hands and soft steps. The elder monks said he was born on a winter's tolling, just a lantern, flickering dim in the gray air, and a small vial of oil he'd mixed by hand cedar and myrrh for purification. Elian wore a thick brown robe cinched at the waist with a cord, and he carried no tools. A parchment prayer was placed beside her handwritten, its letters curling like vines. The scent of lavender and dried wheat filled the corridors, warming the air. His fingers brushed frost from the ancient brass frame as he ascended the spiral steps. Outside, the sky had turned a soft blue-gray, like wool soaked in smoke. Snow fell. Their robes brushed the stone as they knelt in the falling snow, heads bowed toward the tower above. It softened everything, even time. Inside the dormitory halls, Brother Arn and Brother Jova laid fresh reeds. In the scriptorium below, a single candle was lit for Saint Celestina. Patroness, let the bell not startle, but soothe. They shimmered in the lantern light like stars trapped beneath bronze. Let it guide the sleeper. Let it echo in the chambers of the heart. By twilight, the preparations were complete. The monks gathered silently in the cloister yard, each holding a beeswax taper. No words, only the stillness of breath and the hush of waiting. Up in the bell tower, Elian pressed his palm to the great bell. It was cold, so cold it felt like touching the moon. A great inhale, as though the tower itself remembered its purpose. The surface shimmered faintly with frost, and etched into the metal, though barely visible, were old symbols no one had ever translated. Elian took a breath, and then he began. First, the oil rubbed gently along the base of the clapper. Then a whisper of chant, not spoken but breathed. And finally, both hands wrapped around the rope, thick and heavy. With a slow pull, he leaned his weight back, and the bell began to move. It started not with a chime, but a shudder deep in the stone beneath Elian's feet. A sailor, long buried at sea, touched the hand of his aging lover in a dream that seemed too real to fade. Then, gawning, a single toll, long and slow. It rolled down the hillside like mist. It passed over icy ridges, brushed the tops of trees, and flowed like warm air beneath cottage doors. Villagers asleep in their straw beds stirred faintly, not awake, but aware. Some turned over, some smiled faintly, and some wept. The bell rang once more, ganeng. Echoes folded into echoes. Dreams stirred. A mother, long gone, appeared beside her child's cradle in a flicker of memory. The sound was not just heard, it was felt, in marrow, in longing, in the hollow places where wishes slept. And so it tolled, and once more still, until at last the bell was still again. The sound faded slowly, like the last breath of winter itself, and as the snow continued to fall, the monks bowed, and the valley dreamed. Sleep now. Let the hush of snow stay with you. Let the bell's bronze whisper lull you deeper still. You are safe here, warm here, drifting in the valley of soft echoes. Let yourself drift again. Just where you left off, the bell has tolled, and your body knows the sound. Let it hum in your chest, in your breath, in your bones. You're not watching the story, nah, you're inside it. Feel your boots crunch through the snow as we walk slowly. Slowly. Back toward the cloister. The lantern glows soft on the stone. The sky above is velvet, and somewhere in the dark, a barn owl glides low. Without sound. There we are. Come in. But fullness. Back into the warmth of the abbey, where candlelight pools in little golden halos against the floor, and the hearth crackles its low, drowsy song. After the bell had rung its last, and the monks had returned to their chambers, the silence that followed was not emptiness, the kind of stillness that carries meaning. Not a hush that erases, but one that deepens. Brother Elian sat alone for a long while at the top of the tower, legs folded beneath his robe. long after the sound had faded from the air. He watched the stars emerge one by one, in his spine, in his heart. He could still feel the vibrations of the bell beneath him, not loudly, not suddenly, as though something had been awakened within him, but surely, and he wondered how many others in the valley had felt the same. In a little stone cottage nestled just below the eastern ridge, a grandmother stirred in her sleep. Her name was Lina, and she had heard the bell every year since she was a girl. Lina had seen her late husband standing at the edge of her dream. But tonight, something was different. As the sound had wrapped around her like a shawl of mist, not aloud. He didn't speak. He just smiled, the way he always did when they walked the orchard in springtime. And though it had been 20 years since his passing, she felt his hand on hers. He lay curled by the fire, snoring in rhythm with the gentle ticking of the abbey clock. Warm, real, present. When she awoke, her cheeks were wet. But she was smiling too. She lit a small taper and whispered a thank you into the dark. Then she lay back, tucked the blankets close, and let the rest of the night cradle her. Back in the abbey, the brothers did not speak of their dreams. But something passed between them the next morning, over breakfast of oat mash and honeyed tea, something unspoken but deeply understood. Brother Java, who often walked with a limp and rarely smiled, hummed softly to himself while folding the altar linens. Brother Arn paused longer than usual beside the chapel window, eyes soft as he watched a robin pluck red berries from a frost-covered bush. Even the old hound who lived near the hearth, Brother Tomas's dog, Lumin, seemed unusually content. They did not need to explain it. The bell did not ring for understanding. It rang for connection, for memory, for the thrum of something ancient and unseen that moved through the world like a hidden river beneath the snow. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Children in the nearby village made lanterns from waxed paper and string, their mittened hands clutching them as they ran. They didn't know why the bell felt magical, only that it did. A little girl named Mirabelle, no older than 6, told her mother that she had dreamed of a mountain that breathed. She said she saw animals who could talk, and a bird with eyes like the moon. When asked how she knew the dream was real, Mirabelle simply replied, "Because the bell told me." Didn't question it. Thin, but heavy. The spine cracked like dry bark when he opened it. She only brushed a bit of snow from the child's lashes and held her close. Meanwhile, in the abbey's undercroft where ancient records were kept, Brother Elion descended with a lantern in hand. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, but something within him had stirred.
A hum.
A pull. A quiet call that seemed to rise from the stone walls themselves. He passed shelves of brittle parchment, stacked in wooden cabinets, older than many kingdoms. The air smelled of wax and cedar, ink and dust. And finally, in a narrow drawer near the bottom, behind scrolls, wrapped in oilcloth. Not just one, dozens. Different shapes, sizes, and inscriptions all sketched in charcoal with notes written in the margins, in a language Elion did not know. It was the same as the great bell of St. Idris, down to the markings etched around its base, the ones no monk had ever dared translate, except here. In this drawing, the markings were labeled, and beneath them, scrawled in old ink, was a simple line in Latin. Vosen. The voice of dreams is not heard with the eyes, but with the heart. Elion ran his fingers slowly along the line and felt the echo of the bell ring again this time. It rang within him, and he knew this bell had never been meant for waking ears alone. And so we drift, you and I, through snow-covered hills and whispering stone halls, past dreams wrapped in woolen sleep and bells that ring. Let the hush settle in your lungs, in your heartbeat, in your thoughts. You are not alone in the silence. The bell has rung, and you are part of its dream. In the days that followed the tolling, life at the abbey resumed its quiet pattern. Prayers at dawn, scripture in the morning, work in the afternoon. But underneath the ordinary, just beneath the surface, something had changed. As if the echo of the bell still rang in secret corners of the abbey. It rang in the gentle way. Brother Arne paused before speaking now. In the way the young novices hummed lullabies not written in their books. And in the way Brother Alain lingered in the undercroft each evening, poring over that ancient volume of bell drawings by candlelight. More fragments. And among them, faintly scratched into a torn vellum insert, he found a diagram of, not the one at St. Idris Abbey, but another, older, sunken into the ground. A bell with no name. Elion's heart stirred, not with fear, nor confusion, but with longing, like something he'd once lost and forgotten, was calling him back. Outside, the village grew quieter as midwinter deepened. The snow thickened into great white sheets that softened the sound of footsteps, of shutters creaking. Lina, the grandmother who had seen her husband in a dream, found herself rising earlier each day, watching the hills from her small window. Something in her bones told her this winter was different. The kind of different she couldn't quite name. She baked loaves of barley bread and sprinkled them with rosemary, placing one each morning on her windowsill. Something hungry will pass by, she said with a smile, and we should never let hunger go unanswered. The bread would be gone by noon. Every day. But there were no footprints in the snow. And in her dreams, the bell tolled again, not loudly, not like on the eve, but gently, almost like a whisper against glass. And in the hush that followed, she heard her own name spoken in a voice she hadn't heard since childhood. Her sister's voice. Back at the abbey, Elion approached Father Corbin, the oldest of the monks. His beard was white and his eyes clouded, but his memory was sharp as icicles. Father, Elion said softly, do you know of any other towers near here? One that might have held a bell like ours? The old monk looked at him for a long moment, then beckoned him to sit. The ground there is soft with moss, and the trees grow in strange spirals. In my youth, he said, voice like snow sliding from slate, I visited a ruin. A bell tower? Elian asked. Deep in the earth. We were told not to dig. No tower remains. But there was once stone there. Why are not to be disturbed? Father Corbin smiled faintly. Because the wind that comes from that soil is not the kind that touches your face. It touches your dreams. And dreams were there? Elian bowed his head respectfully, but in his heart, he knew he would go. That night, he slept little. Instead, he sat by the fire, feeling the low embers pulse like a heartbeat. In the coals, the bell's echo still lingered in his ribs, calling, not just outward but inward, calling him to remember something he had never been told, a sound deeper than metal, older than bronze, a song that existed before voices ever learned to shape words. He left before dawn the next morning, bundled in layers of wool and fur, carrying a satchel of dried fruit, water, and the old book wrapped in oilcloth. The snow was deep and the trees bare, but the path was quiet, and peace walked beside him. His breath misted in slow clouds, and his boots pressed softly into the white. Birdsong was rare in midwinter, but even so, a raven followed him for a time. When he reached the hollow hold, the wind changed. It grew warmer, despite the snow, and the trees curved toward each other overhead, forming what felt like an arch or a gate. At the center of the clearing, moss grew in thick, green mounds, and beneath one such mound, the stone was carved in circular patterns, rings upon rings each, just as Father Corbin had said, weathered, cracked, half-buried, but real. Elian dropped to his knees, brushing snow from the edges. He placed his palm to it, not with his eyes, but with the quiet part of himself that dreamed. Not the one at St. Idris, sunken beneath the roots of this forest, larger, older, and sleeping, just like the one in the abbey, only deeper. And Elian knew this one had not been rung in many lifetimes, but it was not broken, waiting for someone who remembered its sound, even if they had never heard it aloud. It didn't clang or toll. It shimmered, a tone so low and soft it could barely be heard, and yet Elian felt it in every fiber of his being, like an embrace. And in the moment that sound moved through him, Elian remembered every dream he'd ever forgotten, every image that had faded upon waking, every voice he'd nearly recalled, every longing that had no name. And he wept in his sleep, not from sadness, but from returning. In the days that followed, the snow grew heavier. Even the village roads were difficult to pass, and most travelers stayed tucked by their fires. Lena, the old woman on the ridge, still placed her bread on the windowsill each day. She'd begun to add tiny sprigs of pine beside each loaf, as offerings or invitations. She dreamed again of her sister, but this time they sat together beneath a tree made entirely of bells. And her sister said, "The bell does not only ring once a year, you know." "What do you mean?" Lena asked, puzzled. "It rings wherever someone listens properly." Lena smiled in her sleep, and the wind outside her window seemed too quiet, as if leaning in to listen to. Back at the abbey, the other monks noticed subtle changes in Brother Elion. He moved more slowly now, not from tiredness. He paused to watch the shadows of candlelight flicker across the chapel floor. He lingered near the abbey bell, not to toll it, but to simply rest his hand upon its surface. Eyes closed, Brother Arn whispered to Father Corbin, "He hears things." "I don't." To which the old monk replied, "That's not because he listens more. It's because he remembers more." One evening, as the snow fell in thick, whispering veils, there, by lamplight, he began to copy the oldest Markensta ones from the sketch of a. He traced them slowly, one by one. Each stroke of his quill felt like unlocking a door, not in the abbey, but in his mind, or deeper, somewhere older than thought. And as he copied, only for a moment, a flicker like frost-catching moonlight, but he saw it. And so did Brother Jova, who had entered silently to stoke the fire. He said nothing at first, just watched. Then, after a long silence, he asked, "Brother Elian, who is teaching you to write that language?" Elian did not look up. He only whispered, "The bell." And so the hush deepens again. Let the quiet soak into your thoughts now. You've walked through the snow. You've listened to the wind, as if cloaked in a warm woolen robe. You've heard the name Velora resonate in your chest like a sleeping star. Let your shoulders grow heavier. Let your thoughts drift like the silver snowflakes that fall, soundless, around the hollow hold. Is rising, softly, gently, in you. Sleep now, and let the bell guide you. The abbey had known many winters, but not like this. This winter came with silence that felt sacred, not heavy, like something very old had awakened and was listening. Brother Elian began rising before the others, long before the bell for matins was rung. He would slip into the cloister courtyard wrapped in his fur-lined robe, sit on the bench beneath the snow-covered arches, and simply listen to the air, to the quiet, to the spaces between each breath. And in those spaces came whispers, not quite, but impressions, meanings wrapped in the silence between sounds. Sometimes it felt like a melody, sometimes like a lullaby hummed by someone far, far away. Always, it came with warmth, a warmth not of fire, but of presence. One morning, as the candlelight flickered along the long stone hallway, Brother Alian passed the library and paused. There was something waiting. He stepped inside, and on the reading table found a book he had not taken down. Its binding. But faded, he opened it. There was only one page. One sentence, written in soft, silvery ink, that shimmered as he read. When the bell tolls, he turned the page. Blank. The next. Blank. He flipped through them, all dozens each, one untouched. Only the first held writing. He closed the book slowly and pressed his hand to its cover. Somewhere beneath the hollow hold, the bell named Valora stirred. Far away in the village, a young boy named Corwin dreamed of standing on a mountaintop where the stars fell like snowflakes. He awoke in tears, clutching the blanket to his chest. His mother, startled, came to him at once. "What did you see?" "Love." He shook his head, trembling. "It was beautiful. Too beautiful. Perhaps the bell will take you back again." "I didn't want to leave." She wrapped him in her arms and held him until his breathing slowed. Then, as he drifted back to sleep, she whispered. He didn't respond, but a smile touched his lips. That day, Brother Elian returned to the hollow hold. This time, he brought nothing, and a single question. He knelt before the moss-furred stone circle and placed both hands flat to the earth. He asked, "What would you have me do?" The wind stirred. The trees creaked. Not from strain and beneath the stone, he felt it. A low hum, not rising, but steady, patient, a heartbeat deep in the ground. He sat back, closed his eyes, and listened with his whole being. And there, in that stillness, came a vision. He saw the valley before the abbey was built, a place of wild meadows, winding streams, and sky that sang with every dusk. He saw travelers sleeping in circles around fires, each dreaming the same dream. A bell not yet cast, calling them together. He saw monks carving symbols into stone not to decorate, but to remember. He saw hands forming clay molds, feet stirring molten bronze. He saw a woman wrapped in blue, who whispered blessings into the casting mold. And when the bell was lifted from its bed of earth, it sang before it was ever rung. It wanted to ring, not to mark time, but to keep it whole, to gather the scattered thoughts of the world into a single, harmonious breath. Elian opened his eyes. Snow had begun to fall. Thick, slow flakes drifting like ash from a doused lantern. He whispered one word. The moss beneath his feet seemed to glow faintly, and from the trees above came a soft, metallic chime. Not wind, but metal. As though the bell beneath the earth had answered not with a toll, but with a breath. Back in the abbey, Father Corbin turned sharply in his chair. He stared out the window toward the east hills and murmured, "So it has begun." Brother Jova heard the words and approached. "What has—" But the old monk only smiled and said nothing more. He opened the book, found the page with the hollow-hold sketch, and noticed a line he'd missed before. "The dream bell tolls, not for the living or the dead, but for the space between, a bell for the in-between, for those in mourning, for those in longing, for those not yet ready to leave, and those not quite ready to return, a bell for dreamers." Let that settle in you now. Let the thought hum gently behind your breath, that there may be more than one bell, more than one sound, more than one way the heart can be called home. Sleep now. Drift in the hush between snowflakes, between steps, between the ring, and the silence after. You are safe here. The dream bell tolls for you. Elian sat for a long while beside the stone circle. He didn't speak. He didn't move much. Only listened. At first, all he could hear was the wind threading its way through the bare trees. Then, a hush deeper than silence. The kind of quiet that makes room for something else. It was not quite a sound, more like a presence, like memory stirred from sleep. And from within that hush, Elian felt a word rise in him, not in his voice, not from his own knowing, but given like a name whispered into cupped hands. Velora. Just once. The moment it left his lips, the ground beneath him, not violently, not too startle, just a single, soft beat, like the bell's heart waking in its sleep, and he knew that was her name. The bell buried beneath the hollow hold, Velora. He returned to the abbey after nightfall, snow clinging to the folds of his robe, cheeks tinged pink from the cold. He spoke to no one, but in his chamber he took out a fresh sheet of parchment, and he wrote the name, just that. Velora. He folded the paper 3 times. That night, his dreams were vivid. He stood in a valley of stars, not beneath the stars, among them. The snow was not white, but silver. Slow and cloaked, not unlike his fellow monks. And in the center of that valley stood a great bell, half floating in the air. Around it, figures moved. Only light beneath their hoods. They looked at him, without eyes, and bowed. Then, the bell rang, and as night fell again upon the hills, and the hearths flickered, and the wind coiled itself around the abbey walls, the bell's hum rose, not in sound, but in dream. Every monk, every villager, every child wrapped in blankets, and every widow rocking by the fire, dreamed of the bell. They stood in a ring, each holding a tiny flame, waiting, listening, and just before waking, they heard her name, Velora. Rest now. Let the bell hum through your breath and down into your belly. Let the warmth of ancient bronze wrap you like a quilt. There are bells beneath the world. You know, not all of them ring aloud. Some sing only in your dreams. Sleep, and let the door open. In the morning light, soft and pale as milk, the abbey stirred to life again. But this dawn was quieter than the ones before, as if every stone of the abbey had taken a breath in the night and was still holding it. The bell above had not rung since the eve, but below Deet, below the other bell was beginning to speak, not in words, not in noise, but in dreams. The monks woke changed, not startled, not afraid, but still, altered. Brother Arn, the one whose hands always trembled at morning prayers, found them steady as stone. Brother Tomas, the one who rarely remembered names, looked each novice in the eye and greeted them by name, woke weeping, not from sorrow, but because he had dreamed of his sister. She had died when they were both children. In the dream, she stood beside a frozen stream, her hands full of wildflowers that should not have been blooming in snow. She looked up at him and said, "I heard it. I remembered." Then she placed one flower in his hand and vanished. And when Jova awoke, fist clenched around air, he could still smell lavender. Brother Elian walked the outer path of the abbey's walls, footsteps soft, eyes to the east, where the hollow hold waited beyond the ridge. As though he was tuning himself, like one would a harp string tightening, listening, adjusting. Some bells rang with sound, some with silence, and some with knowing. That afternoon, as the monks gathered in the refectory for bread and broth, Father Corbin tapped his spoon lightly to the rim of his cup. Just once. The sound echoed gently. All eyes turned to him. "It is time," he said. No one asked for what. They all knew. After that night, the world did not change in obvious ways. There was no thunder from the sky, no fire or flashing sign. But those who had gathered at the hollow hold felt it. A deep tuning had begun, as if a string stretched between stars had been plucked and was still vibrating, calling everything back into harmony. Brother Alian no longer questioned whether Velora had spoken. He no longer wondered if she was real. He felt her hum in every stone he passed, in the pause between prayers, in the stretch of silence that lives after a deep sigh. And he began to teach the novices not through words, but through stillness, and simply sit. He would take them to the cloister at dusk. At first, the young ones fidgeted, whispered, shifted, but slowly, something in them quieted. They began to feel what Elian felt. The bell behind the world, not always ringing. Why do I feel like I've been here before, even though I haven't, but always there? One boy, little Thomas, no older than 12, sat beside Alian one evening and asked. Alian smiled, eyes half closed. Because this place remembers you? The boy tilted his head. The abbey. No, Ilian whispered. The quiet. Meanwhile, in the village, something curious began to happen. Children began waking with songs on their lips, melodies no one had taught them. Elders began remembering dreams from years past, fragments of long-lost faces took on a quality not quite heavier, but not burdensome, fuller, more alive, as if each flake carried a message, not to the mind, but to the heart. Lina, the old woman on the ridge, found herself humming a lullaby one morning as she swept her hearth. It wasn't until halfway through that she realized it was the same song her mother used to hum, the same one she hadn't heard in over 60 years, and yet every note was still inside her, like it had never left. She paused, broom in hand, and whispered toward the window. "Thank you, Valora," Jova said. Slowly, there were other bells like her in other places. Back at the abbey. Back at the abbey. Well, they were in the undercroft again, where the ancient bell book lay open under the flicker of oilight. Ilian didn't hesitate. Yes, some are ringing, and some are broken. Jova swallowed. And do you think they're still asleep? Ilian traced his finger along the vellum edge of the book and whispered, I think. Some are waiting. But Valora Jova began. Was never meant to ring alone, Ilian finished. That night, as the fire dimmed and the frost painted lacework upon the abbey's windows, Ilian returned once more to the hollow hold. This time, he brought a bowl of melted snow and honey, and a single feather he had found outside the scriptorium of ravens, dark and iridescent. He placed both upon the stone and said, Only let what sleeps in me awaken. And slept. What he saw in dream was not a place, but a map of feeling, a weave of sound and silence, a memory of moments not yet lived. He saw people strangers across mountains and valleys, all pausing in the same moment, heads lifted, eyes closed, and in the air between them all, longing to be mended, a bell's whisper, low, golden, true. He saw cities with hidden cathedrals. He saw valleys where no bells had ever been cast, but where the earth itself hummed with ancient tones, waiting for a voice to shape them. and he saw his own hands, but listening to it. When Elion woke, the bowl of honeyed snow was gone, and the feather had turned to gold, but the gold of sunlight through mist, the gold of breath in candlelight. He picked it up gently and tucked it into the bell book, then rose and walked home. And now, let the snow fall again in your mind. Let it settle on the rooftops of your thoughts. Let the hush return. A hush not empty, but full of meaning just out of reach. The bell does not always toll. It simply waits for you to notice the silence. Sleep now. Valora is near, and she remembers you. The Abbey's days were simple, as all true things are. Prayer, bread, silence, stacking wood, tending hens, warming the sick with broth, and listening. Not just to voices, but to the silence beneath them. He began to walk slower, and when he paused, others paused too, as if the very air bowed its head. The bell, of course, had not rung since that fateful winter, but somehow she was still speaking, not through clamor, but through memory. One novice described it like this: "It's like the sound lives in my chest now, like something soft and bronze, humming just beneath the ribs." Brother Jova said it best. She rang once, and now the whole valley remembers how to listen. One snowy evening, a letter arrived from a distant monastery. The messenger, red-nosed and shivering, handed it to Elian and said, "From the east, past the groves of Rohan Dave." Heard something. Elian's hands trembled slightly as he broke the wax seal. Inside, a single parchment. In careful hand, it read, "Brother Elian, we do not know why. They said they heard a bell tolling in their dreams. No bell in our monastery has rung in over a century. We lit candles at dawn. The silence was different. Do you know what this means? Brother Jelen, keeper of the cloistered gate," Elian folded the parchment and wept. Over the following weeks, more letters came. From wandering friars, woodcutters, widows, even shepherds who hadn't spoken to a soul in seasons. They all said the same thing, in different ways. A bell is ringing in our dreams. And though they never heard it awake, something changed after it came. One old farmer wrote, "The fields were brittle with frost, and I was ready to give up. Then I dreamed I heard a single note, but it echoed through everything. I woke up and sowed again. I don't know why, but I did. And spring came." Back in the abbey, Elian gathered the letters in a box wrapped in wool, which he kept near the bell book. He called it the echo chest. Each time a letter arrived, he read it aloud to the novices. Not as proof, not as teaching, but as a kind of prayer, a reminder that even what rings once may ripple through time. It was Brother Jova who suggested the next step. He found Aelion one morning in the snowy orchard, pruning the frozen branches of the plum trees. "Aelion," he said, breath visible in the dawn air. "What if we are not meant to be the only ones who listen?" Aelion looked at him, said nothing, but Jova continued, "What if there are others, waiting for their own bells, for a tone to wake their hearts again?" Aelion closed his eyes, and in that moment he remembered the dream. The vision of many across the land, all pausing at once, hearing the same low call. He opened his eyes. "Then we go to them." And so it began, a pilgrimage, not to a shrine, not to a relic, but to share silence. The monks did not preach. They did not carry banners or call crowds. They simply walked. And in every village, they asked, "Only this, may we sit with you?" But some did not. In fields and forest clearings, on chapel stones and market thresholds, people joined them. Not many. A baker, a child, an old woman with hair like wool, a woodworker with rough hands and kind eyes. They sat, they breathed, they listened. And in that stillness, something came alive. Not a sound, but the shape of a sound. Like the hush before music. Like a door, half open, back at the abbey. The seasons passed. Snow to thaw, thaw to bloom. Bloom to golden dusk. The bell did not ring. But neither did it sleep. She simply waited. And the valley, once known only for its bitter frost and moss-covered stones, became something else. People began calling it the Listening Hollow, a place where silence had a shape, where breath felt older, where dreams arrived gently and still. Once a year, on the longest night, the monks would descend into the hollow hold. They would gather, not to ring the bell, but to thank her for ringing when she did. They brought with them stories from the echo chest, and they read them aloud, one by one, in soft voices, until the air itself seemed to shimmer. And those sleeping in the valley smiled in their dreams. Let that smile find you. Now, let it warm your chest. Let it curl softly at the corners of your mouth. Let the hush of the valley settle into your ribs. You don't need to do anything now. Not even listen. Only rest. Only be. Bellora is near. Into the heart of a winter, unlike any other. The year that followed the first dream bell was quieter than most, not because people had grown mute, but because they had begun to listen more. In the hollow, even the birds seemed to sing softer. Even the crows, the noisiest of them, cawed with a sort of velvet restraint. Snow fell gently, and even the wind, when it passed through the pines, sounded not like a howl, but like a hymn half remembered. Aelion, older now, began writing in the bell book again. He wrote not just of sound, but of silence. December, year of the dream bell. I sat under the yew tree near the south wall. The snow beneath me did not creak. The air was so still, I could hear the wings of a moth. A feeling came over me familiar, like the scent of old parchment or the hush. It felt like the bell was nearby, not ringing, not moving. He stopped writing, looked out across the misted fields, and for a moment the wind seemed to carry something faint, the idea of a tone, like a dream that hadn't yet begun. The novices now practiced not just chores and chants, but the art of hallowed quiet. Each day, for 1 hour, they would sit in the cloister, walk, no words, just presence. One young boy, Tomas, once asked, "But, Brother Elian, what if I fall asleep?" Elian only smiled. Then the bell is doing its work. In distant villages, echoes continued. A merchant's wife awoke one morning saying she had heard the bell and decided to forgive a years-old grudge. A baker who once shouted orders now whispered blessings over every loaf. A wandering minstrel, upon hearing the tale of Valora, put down his lute and took up silence, for a season just. But it was softer, as if the dream bell had not just rung, but sounded out a new way to be. That winter, as the first snows began to fall again, something unusual happened. Brother Jova, now quite old, had a dream. In it, the bell was not ringing, but singing. Not words, not notes, but something warmer, a melody shaped like safety. He awoke with tears in his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he wrote a poem. Let the bronze be still. Let the wind not blow. And in that quiet hush of frost, let hearts begin to glow. The bell may sleep, but silence wakes,